Alright, so I got some new data here for you guys that was commissioned by Bernard Sanders on just how completely absurd and ridiculous the current economic structure of the United States and our global systems as well have gotten. So here from Common Dreams, Jake Johnson. He says 34% of big profitable US corporations paid $0, a whopping $0 in federal taxes in the first year of Trump's tax law. And keep in mind, this was essentially Donald Trump's biggest legislative accomplishment. Surprise, surprise, the so-called outsider, this billionaire con man from New York City. Okay, this guy wanted to cut taxes for himself and his rich buddies. I mean, call me surprised at that, I guess. But I mean, this was his biggest accomplishment. This is something that he brags about. And not only was this his biggest accomplishment when he was president, but now we have a GOP in control of the House of the Representatives after the midterm elections, and they are not only trying to double down on solidifying the Trump tax cuts for the foreseeable future, but also taking it even a step further on that and trying to impose higher taxes on average working class Americans while continuing to cut them for the wealthiest billionaires and corporations in this country. So a little bit of details here from Jake. He says a study released Friday by the Government Accountability Office found that more than a third of large profitable corporations in the United States paid nothing, absolutely nothing in federal income taxes in 2018, the year that the regressive Trump GOP tax cuts took effect. And I mean, again, we're talking about a third of these large profitable corporations paying zero in federal taxes. So this isn't even, getting into how many corporations are paying, minimal amounts, way less than they should be, right? That would probably be over a vast majority of them, if not all of them, are not paying nearly what the American people actually want them to be paying. Okay, but we're going to circle back around to a little bit of a polling data breakdown on what Americans actually support in regards to addressing this. But they continue saying that the GAO analysis commissioned by, again, Senator Bernard Sanders showed that, quote, average effective tax rates, the percentage of income paid after tax breaks among profitable large corporations, fell from 16% in 2014 to 9% in 2018. Okay, the average effective tax rate. Okay, the average effective tax rate among these profitable corporations is at 9% in 2018. 9%. Okay, now obviously I'm going to talk about Joe Biden's recent proposal, which they slipped into the Inflation Reduction Act to do a 15% minimum tax on some large corporations, emphasis on the some large corporations. But honestly, that's completely pathetic too. I mean, that's a half measure that is barely even would be taking us up to the average from 2014. So it's not even increasing taxes. It's basically just trying to put the onus on a lot of these large corporations to pay like literally anything. All right. So, I mean, again, this is how we have structured our systems. This is how we have structured our laws, our tax codes, in order to explicitly benefit the wealthiest people and corporations in this country while screwing over the rest of us. And so keep in mind all of this data whenever Republicans or liberals, for that matter, come out and they say, well, how are you going to pay for this policy to help, working class Americans with childcare or healthcare or education or housing or any of these various issues that we talk about? Whenever they say, how are you going to pay for it? Where are you going to get all of this money from? First of all, again, I have my disagreements with that framing because I use the lens of modern monetary theory for those types of analyses. But the point is, even under their own model, if you want to say, well, we have to pay for these programs up front, well, you have all of this money, billions, if not trillions of dollars, which is sitting untaxed and is basically just being hoarded in the hands of the top 1%, the top 0.1% in this country. And we are just sitting back and letting it happen. And not only that, but many liberals and conservatives use this situation as an opportunity to force austerity on some of the most vulnerable people in the country. But they continue down here, saying that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which former President Donald Trump signed into law in December of 2017, I mean, you gotta love the titles of a lot of these bills that they push through, right? Similar to like, oh, the Patriot Act, like we're not spying on you and doing a bunch of unconstitutional bullshit. This is the Patriot Act. It's good, right? You should be a patriot and support it. I mean, similar here, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. I mean, we know the data from this. The vast majority of the tax cuts went to the wealthiest, top 10%, top 1%, and middle and lower income people. Actually, some of them would see a tax increase in the long run as a result from that. But also on top of that, saying that this is somehow going to like spur job creation. I mean, it's complete bullshit, right? We know what these corporations are spending their profits on, right? They spend them on stock buybacks and dividends to enrich their wealthy Wall Street shareholders and executives. They don't spend this on investing that money they saved from the tax cuts back into their businesses and creating all of these millions of new good paying jobs. It's a complete fucking lie. But of course, they slipped that in here to the title of this bill, and they say that it slashed the corporate tax rate from 35% to 21%. And also reminder that Joe Biden's proposal was to take this up to 28%. Okay, so halfway between where it was under Donald Trump versus where it was under Obama. So even Joe Biden was, and he didn't even successfully get that, but he was trying to push it back up like halfway to before the Trump tax cuts. So in essence, essentially trying to keep in place some of the Trump tax cuts and benefits for these corporations. But Trump took it down from 35 to 21% and authorized a slew of other giveaways that made it easier for large businesses and wealthy individuals to lower their tax bills. And we're going to finish off here. They say the GAO report doesn't name specific companies that paid nothing in federal income taxes over the period the federal agency examined, but separate analyses from outside organizations such as the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy have identified such corporations. In 2021, so this is multiple years after this, the ITEP found that at least 55 U.S. corporations, including Nike, FedEx, HP, and Kinder Morgan, paid $0 in federal taxes on 2020 profits. So, I mean, do you think that Nike and FedEx and HP were not making profits in those years? I mean, it's just completely insane. $0 in profits from some of the wealthiest corporations on the face of the planet. And again, it's not just the corporate side of this, it's also a lot of these capital owners that control corporate America, right? It's also the billionaire and the billionaire class. So here from the Washington Post, a little bit more data from a couple years ago, but obviously still rings true today. They say for the first time in U.S. history, billionaires paid a lower tax rate than the working class last year. So again, it's not even just like, oh, they're not necessarily paying as much as we would like them to, and hopefully we can get them to throw a little bit more and pitch in. No, they're paying lower effective tax rates than you. Okay, unless you happen to be like some sort of like middle of the road millionaire or something like that, right? Lower effective tax rates than the bottom 50% are paying on average, okay? The richest 400 families right here, the bottom 50%, and this is where we are right now, okay? Lower effective tax rates. It's completely insane. I mean, I don't know how anybody could look at this data and not come to the conclusion that we are in fact living in an oligarchy, because there is no way that a truly democratic and representative government would be allowing this type of a situation to unfold. But a little bit more data here also from 2019 from the New York Times to emphasize the same point. They say that the rich really do pay lower taxes than you. Okay, so this is basically charting the plot of where we were back in like the 1950s and where we have gotten to this point today. So this is essentially the unwinding of a lot of FDR's New Deal era policies, where we did have substantial taxes, especially on the upper brackets on, you know, wealthy individuals and corporations in this country, and they were all the way up here. I mean, we're talking about getting up above 70% for this tax rate, right, back in 1950. And then you slowly start to see it trickle down here. We have the era of neoliberalism being ushered in here, deregulation, privatization, and tax cuts for the wealthy. And this is where we're at right now in 2018. Okay, so I mean, again, it's just completely plummeted. This is where we were in 1950. So when conservative, you know, propagandists or politicians come out and they say, oh my God, the radical left, scary, woke, socialist, Marxist, whatevers want to go out and they want to tax us into oblivion. There's no way the American economy would be able to sustain itself if we had something like a 40% or a 50% tax rate. Well, look throughout U.S. history. I mean, you could argue for the vast majority of modern American history since the 1950s. I mean, they've been paying at least above 40%, right? I mean, this is the anomaly right here. Where we're at right now is the anomaly in that equation, right? So this is like the historical norm, and we've just completely accepted this narrative that like, oh, we have to keep these taxes down where they are right now, or else, you know, the American economy is going to collapse, or all of these corporations are going to flee the United States, right? I mean, it's completely insane. And also, I think it's important to point out here that it's not even just about taxing these people in order to like pay for certain social programs for working class Americans. If that's the lens of analysis that we have to use in order to get some basic like social programs for the American people, then fine, I'm willing to have that conversation about taxing billionaires and corporations more to quote unquote pay for some of these other policies. If we have to do that, that's completely fine. But another, and really the main purpose, or one of the main purposes of taxation, using that modern monetary monetary theory of analysis, right? Basically, one of the main purposes of taxation is to take that money and effectively redistribute it by pulling it out of the economy from these, centers where it is accumulating and where these billionaires and corporations are hoarding it, right? That's part of the purpose of taxation, is that you are taking money out from certain parts of the economy, putting money back in other certain parts of the economy in order to create somewhat of a more level playing field, right? So there are multiple different reasons why increasing their taxes would be a good thing, and it's not just like, oh, for the fun of it, or to pay for Medicare for all or something like that. It's a much deeper issue than that. But a little bit more data. This is something that I bring up all the time whenever I'm discussing wealth or income inequality or the history of neoliberalism here in the United States. So from Time Magazine, I believe they're referencing this RAND study here. They say the top 1% of Americans have taken $50 trillion from the bottom 90%, and that's made the US less secure. Okay, so this comes out to roughly like $1,400 a month in the pockets of every single American over the last number of decades during this era, since about like the 1970s, 1980s, and we're talking about $50 trillion being shoveled from the bottom 90% to the top 1%. Another way you could portray that is a wealth transfer or wealth redistribution, if you like. Okay, it's just that we're doing wealth redistribution in the opposite way than what we should be doing, right? I mean, it's hilarious seeing so many conservatives come out and complain about the idea of wealth redistribution. It's like, that is literally what capitalism does. Capitalism is redistributing wealth that should be going to the workers who are doing the labor that provides the value that makes these companies profitable. They should be the ones who are getting that wealth distributed to them, and instead you are redistributing that and taking that surplus value and shipping it off to the executives, the Wall Street ghouls, the CEOs, etc., right? So there's always wealth redistribution. It's just about like, where do you want to actually do that redistributing, right? But one more piece of data here. They say the world's richest 1%. So this is just over the COVID pandemic era, essentially. So this is from just a couple days ago or yesterday. The world's richest 1% raked in 2/3 of all new wealth. Okay, and that comes out to about, the 1% gaining $26 trillion, and the rest of us, the bottom 99% of the global population, at just $16 trillion, 2/3 going to the top 1%. Okay, and this is somehow an economic model that our elites, that our media, that our corrupted politicians think is somehow acceptable, number one, or even sustainable. Believe it or not, it is not going to be sustainable, and we are seeing all of these other tangential problems with the rise of a lot of far right fake populists like Trump himself, and all of these different things that are coinciding issues with that. The situation that average Americans find themselves in with piling up medical debt and unable to find stable housing and working paycheck to paycheck, and the homeless crisis that is going on right now, all of these different issues, unaffordability of education, etc., right? These things are inevitably going to cause an internal confrontation between these two different classes that we have structured in our economy, right? But somehow they think that is probably not going to be the case. But some data here on the polling in terms of what the American people actually support in terms of addressing some of these issues. So here from the Brookings Institute, they say Americans want the wealthy and corporations to pay more in taxes, but are elected officials listening? No, clearly they are not listening. Again, here from Reuters, this one's from 2020. Majority of Americans favor wealth tax on the very rich, okay? And we have this one as well. Most millionaires support a tax on wealth above $50 million. So circling back to this one, okay? So not only do the American people support taxing the wealthy, not only do they support taxing higher income brackets more, not only do they support, taxing wealthy corporations in this country more, but even millionaires want to tax millionaires more, and somehow, again, elected officials are, it's not getting through to them, I guess, right? We know that they have the best of intentions, but it's just, what are you going to do about it, right? But so what do we have as an actual, outcome in terms of what is going to be done from this point forward? Well, we have, again, the GOP recently took control of the House of Representatives after the midterm elections, and what are they trying to do? Well, here from American Progress, GOP members of Congress threatened debt limit default to cut Social Security and Medicare. So obviously I've talked about this multiple multitude of different times on this channel. We knew that this was coming, but still, I mean, it's just wild to look at this situation, right? All of that data we just went through, piles and piles and piles of cash that are sitting in, the pockets of wealthy billionaires, millionaires, corporations in this country. And Republicans are turning around and saying, oh my God, but what about the debt? What about the deficit? Well, hang on a second. You just blew up the fucking deficit in order to do the Trump tax cuts just a couple years ago, which led to this situation that we have right now. 34% of big profitable US corporations paid nothing in federal taxes during the first Trump years. So again, they're using this idea that, oh, we don't have enough money to pay for these social programs because we just cut a bunch of taxes for billionaires and corporations and millionaires, and so we have absolutely no choice but to threaten to tank the American and global economy and to hold our government hostage in order to force austerity on working class Americans under the guise of this completely false premise that they themselves helped to usher in. I mean, it's complete and utter insanity. They are honestly this is genocidal towards working class people. These people are obviously corrupt in many different ways, but on top of that, I mean, this is just evil. It's just straight up demented shit. This is not a disagreement on economic policies and what would be better for growth or what would be better in the long run for the American people and job creation and whatever the fuck. No, you guys are just corrupt demons. I mean, it's that simple at the end of the day if you're trying to give some sort of an honest analysis of the actual situation here. But it gets even worse. Not only are they trying to cut Social Security and Medicare, but here from the Washington Post, again, just from a couple days ago, they say post-Trump Republicans are all about lowering taxes even further than where they are with those Trump tax cuts and all of this other data that we just went through, right? So they start off here. They say, as is their custom, Republicans changed the name of the House, and this part is just absolutely fucking hilarious. It's a surface level thing, but it's also just a perfect example of who Republicans are right now. But they say, as is their custom, Republicans changed the name of the House Education and Labor Committee last week. It is now called the Committee on Education and the Workforce. So they took the word labor out of there, and we're going to get to their justification for why they did that here in a second. And they say that it was from 2011 to 2019 when the party last controlled the House. Okay, so here's their justification. They say, labor is an antiquated term that excludes individuals who contribute to the American workforce but aren't classified as conventional employees. Okay, so you're talking about capitalists, you're talking about capital owners, right? You're not talking about actual laborers, you're not talking about workers, you're not talking about people who use their labor or sell their labor in order to, get their income to live on, right? You're talking about capital owners, you're talking about people who survive off of static things like capital that earn them, passive income, right? That's what you're talking about. These are not people who are actually relying directly on their labor to accumulate their wealth. Okay, so there is an important distinction there between actual workers and bosses, or the capital ownership class, but they seem to think there's no difference whatsoever. They say that labor also carries a negative connotation that ignores the dignity of work. What the fuck does that even mean? The term is something out of a Marxist textbook that fails to capture the accomplishments of the full spectrum of the American workforce. So this is the direct explanation from the renamed committee's website. Okay, so they're saying it's basically just Marxist propaganda to use the word labor on this committee. I mean, this is how serious they are. Okay, completely ridiculous, unserious people. They're like actual children, and they contradict this narrative here being put out by Republicans in this Washington Post article, although they get into some questionable other takes here below. They say that one thing to note here is that this account is historically illiterate. The very first Republican Party presidential campaign was waged on the slogan free soil, free labor, free speech, free men, and Fremont, neatly tying together the nascent party's ideology with the name of John C. Fremont, its standard bearer. And in 1861, Abraham Lincoln also argued, quote, capital is only the fruit of labor and could have never existed if labor had not first existed. And I'm going to circle back around to this, but we also had a take here from none other than the probably single worst president in American history, Ronald Reagan himself, who also used this word, saying America depends on the work of labor and the economy we build should reward and encourage that labor as our hope for the future. Now, obviously, this is complete dog shit, knowing what Ronald Reagan was actually fighting for. I mean, again, one of the biggest proponents of ushering in this neoliberal era, which explicitly, gave as much power and wealth to the top 1% of the American people, and basically decimated labor unions and all of these different things. So this is a dishonest statement here from Ronald Reagan, to say the least. No surprise there. But we also had this, from Abraham Lincoln again. And just as a reminder, Abraham Lincoln actually had some correspondence with none other than Karl Marx himself. And Karl Marx actually was kind of a little bit of a fan of Abraham Lincoln back in the day. But this is a really good quote here from Lincoln. He said, "Capital is only the fruit of labor." Okay, meaning capitalists cannot accumulate wealth without labor doing the actual physical work in order to provide that value for them, right? So capital is only the fruit of labor and could have never existed if labor had not first existed. 100% base take there from Abraham Lincoln himself. But again, circling back around to this, where we're at right now with this situation, right? We've gone through all of the data. We've listened to some of the quotes. We're seeing what the Republican Party is choosing to focus on right now. Oh, I almost forgot to cover this as well quickly here. They're also, in addition to trying to continue to cut Social Security and Medicare, to try to re-entrench the Trump tax cuts as well and push further tax cuts, they're also coming out with this thing, again, loving the name here, the Fair Tax Act, which is something that the House GOP is trying to push. They say the legislation would replace the current income tax, payroll tax, and estate tax. Okay, the estate tax. Keep in mind, who might that benefit? People with estates, okay? And they're going to get rid of all of these things, the income tax, the payroll tax, the estate tax. Again, the payroll tax, who does that benefit primarily? With a 30% national sales tax. They are seriously trying to propose a 30% national sales tax. These are the same motherfuckers who are running around like, chickens with their heads cut off, talking about inflation every day. Meanwhile, inflation, as we know, is largely being driven by corporate America, the people who they are trying to give more tax cuts and more power to, right? But on top of that, they're looking at a situation with historic levels of inflation, and they're like, you know what we should do? We should apply a 30% sales tax. So all of these different goods that you're going out and buying on an average daily basis, right? 30% on top of it, because that's what Republicans want to do in order to cut taxes for disproportionately wealthy millionaires and billionaires in this country. It's just absolutely amazing how brazen they are in serving the interests of corporate America. But it gets even more hilarious. They say, except to make it sound better, the fair tax proponents call it a 23% tax instead of the 30% tax, which it actually is. And here's their little math loophole, their workaround here. They say their logic is that if something sells for $100 plus $30 in tax, that would be a 30% tax right there. But they're saying that it's actually a 23% tax because $30 is 23% of the new total $130. Okay, this is not how you do these calculations. They're just completely lying about this. Okay, you would obviously do, okay, if you have a $100 purchase, 30% of that would be $30 added on top of it. You don't take the percentage from the new number after you've added on the sales tax. That's not how that math works, but this is what they're doing, and trying to push through what they're calling the Fair Tax Act. I mean, seriously, this is what they're calling it. This is fair taxation to them, okay? Making it so that 34% of big profitable U.S. corporations pay nothing in federal taxes, making it so that the richest, 1% in this country pay lower effective tax rates than average, bartenders in this country, okay? And meanwhile, we are going to slap a 30% tax on something which obviously is disproportionately going to affect lower and middle income people in this country. But again, just going to finish off here with what Democrats are doing to push back against this. Now, this isn't entirely terrible, right? This is a 15% minimum tax. This was through the Inflation Reduction Act. Now, again, it's 15%. Okay, so that's not even remotely close to the amount that they actually should be paying in a fair tax type of a system, right? It's nowhere close to enough, but the fact that we have so many corporations that are paying $0 in taxes, if this actually was applying across the board to all of these different corporations, 15%, that would be better than the current situation that we have right now, right? So it's not all bad, but again, in typical Joe Biden fashion, it's kind of just like a lazy half measure. And as they point out here from Forbes, only 33 of the 100 largest U.S. companies could be subjected to this corporate minimum tax. Okay, 33. So 33% of the largest and wealthiest corporations in the country are going to pay minimum 15% tax. Okay, so that's the best that Democrats can do, I guess. Now, I mean, again, obviously this is completely pathetic, but on top of this entire situation being completely pathetic and egregious and absurd and evil and all of that, it's also unsustainable. This is not an economic model that is going to be able to last for the foreseeable future. You simply cannot structure an economy, you cannot structure a society, you cannot structure a country, okay, and expect to have some sort of cohesion between all of these different classes that we have structured. And have a situation where the top 1% has way more wealth or multiple times more wealth than the bottom half of the country, where a handful of people, 4 billionaires in this country, have more wealth than the bottom half of the country. I mean, it's just a completely absurd situation. Obviously, we need to be taxing these corporations more, we need to be taxing these millionaires and billionaires more, and we need to actually be doing a wealth redistribution that benefits the vast majority of the American people.
Everyone is saying good Politic guy has the best Politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying